Well, something stood out to this one. So that's only when it's being presented. It's flashing. That's about it. Okay, we'll start. All right. Any questions about Simon? Okay, due this week. So let me know if you have any questions, but otherwise you can turn it on online. Should be a place to turn it in. So all good. Okay. As I mentioned, there's also a reading on there in the module. So if you go into the CAT courses, you'll see that there's a module there, and there's a pretty big reading, and it kind of describes the U.S. healthcare system. Again, you don't have to read, you don't have to memorize it. It's more for just background, so it kind of describes the U.S. healthcare system somewhat. Having said this, today we're going to talk about the U.S. healthcare system. So by the end of the day, you'll probably see why it's pretty confusing. Yeah, but that does kind of bed some document. All right, you ready? Okay, first question. Who provides healthcare? So when we talk about healthcare services, we're talking about, we distinguish kind of between medical care and healthcare. So medical care is what we traditionally think of as like hospitals and primary care providers and things like that. But healthcare is more generally sort of seen as the other things that can go along with it, like diabetes prevention programs and traumatologists and people like that. They all kind of go into the broader healthcare. When I speak about healthcare, I'm just kind of speaking about that broader kind of view about all the healthcare providers, and not just medical care providers. But as we go through it, you'll see is that medical care providers are the main ones, the dominant ones. So that's what we're going to talk to most about. And then, but the way to think about this is that when we were talking last time about clinical guidelines, and sort of saying is that, well, people, the clinical guidelines are things that provide, kind of the pathway that people should go through when they need some type of healthcare. Those clinical guidelines, they typically include both medical care, hospitals should do, GPs should do, and they also include things like going to exercise programs and healthy eating programs and things like that that go outside of just the medical. Okay, first thing is primary care providers. So when we talk about primary care providers, usually when we talk about primary care There's also the nurse practitioners, physician's assistants. They tend to work with like if you go into, like oftentimes if you go to a GP's office for something like you got a ear infection, is that you'll probably see a nurse practitioner. And then nurse practitioners can do some of the things that doctors can do, that medical doctors can do, which is why they tend to see patients more than for kind of non-complicated things. Primary care providers, though, can also be obstetricians and pediatricians and internists. It can also be a pharmacist or a traditional healer, or it can be WebMD. What we mean by primary care is we mean by whoever your first point of contact is with the healthcare system. So that's what primary care means. So if you think about kind of the traditional word, when we talk about the biomedical view of healthcare, is that in the way that sort of the American Medical Association view how healthcare should work, they would say, oh, everyone should have a primary care doctor, a GP, and that then you should go to your GP if you have some type of issue, and the GP then can refer you to a specialist. And so then, you go see the specialist if the GP says so, and things like that. So that's the way they generally think about it. But in reality, people don't always go to a GP for things, especially if you don't have health insurance. Sometimes, for some people, the emergency department's their primary care provider, being their first point of contact. For other people, going to a pharmacist is their first point of contact, or calling family, whatever it's going to be. But that's what primary care really means. It means whatever your first point of contact is. For secondary care means essentially hospital care. And then what secondary care is about acute care. So acute care means that you're there just for a specific type of treatment. So for example, emergency department. If you go to the emergency department, the idea is that the emergency department is going to treat you for the acute illness, the acute phase. Acute means something that's temporal or for a short term. And the difference between is going to be between acute and chronic. So acute things are what should be done in the hospital. So if you break your leg, you have the acute phase where you go into the emergency department. Childbirth is typically seen as an acute event that you would have in the hospital. So things like that, short period of time, you get the treatment, and then you're past the acute phase. So chronic things then are usually things that last more than 6 months. That's kind of the rule of thumb definition for a chronic condition. So if you have diabetes, or if you have heart disease, or something like that, those are chronic conditions. Acute things are things where there's a short duration. Now sometimes you can have an acute phase with a chronic condition. So you might have diabetes, and your diabetes is being controlled, and then suddenly your diabetes goes out of control, and then you get to live in a hospital. So you can have an acute phase for this chronic condition. But the idea is that once that kind of episode ends for your condition, then you go back to being in the chronic management phase of it. This becomes important when you start looking at, especially when you start talking about elder care, because as we'll talk about in a second, Medicare, which is what covers most people over 65, doesn't pay for long-term care. So when your older family members get really older and that start to need kind of get that phase of life in their 80s, let's say, what happens to all of us is that people start having more and more chronic conditions, and then as they start to get more frail, something will happen. They'll fall, they'll have like a heart condition, whatever it is. They fall and then they go in the hospital, and then they stay there for a few days. But the idea is that they're going to be released. So, for example, I was just down in Long Beach for my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is 86, and then she has heart problems, so that it's hard for her to walk, hard for her to get around. And so the big thing for someone who's like that is, can you get out of the chair, right? So the little thing that you may want to work on as you get older is doing these exercises where you kind of do squats, because it turns out when you get older, the important thing is, can you get out of the chair? Because if you can get out of the chair, then you can get off the toilet, you can get out of the chair with a walker, you can get out of the chair into a wheelchair. If you can't pull yourself out of the chair, then you're basically immobile. And then you have to go to like a long-term care facility where you get constant care. So that turns out to be really, really key. So mother-in-law had an incident, ends up in the hospital. We drive down to Long Beach, and then she is in the hospital. And it's clear is that they don't want to keep her for very long, right? Because they're looking to see, is this something for which, is she going to get somewhat better so that then she can get out of the chair again, or not? And if she's not going to get better, then they're going to say, well, you're discharged from the hospital, then you need to go to a long-term care facility. So where a lot of people get issues is that when they have a chronic condition, and so they're in that phase of being somewhat infirm, and then they have an incident, and they go in the hospital, and that the hospital doesn't want to keep them very long, 3 days, and so they're going to discharge them. And so the question is, where do they discharge them to? If they can't go back home, then they have to go to a rehab hospital, or they have to go to a long-term care facility. But most Medicare won't pay for long-term care facilities, and most rehab hospitals will only keep you for a few days. So it means that people can get in this position whereby they can't go home because they can't function by themselves alone with their spouse. And at the same time, they don't, there's no long-term care facility set up. And so there's a scrambling period that goes on there. So that's what happens. That's where the intersection between chronic care and acute care that kind of hits. Because when people have chronic conditions, they have an acute phase, and they suddenly have to, you have to figure out, are they going to be able to go back and live independently or not? So where does secondary care occur? Mostly hospitals. So when we talk about secondary care, we're talking about hospitals, but it can also be if you go to a specialist. So like down here in Assembly Avenue, there's all sorts of specialists. And that when you go see a specialist, then if you go to ear, nose, and throat person, that's a specialist. So that's technically secondary care, because you're not really the patient of the ear, nose, and throat doctor. You're the patient of the primary care doctor, whom you're just going to see the long-term care in this specialist. And this idea about whose patient you are, it makes a big difference, because it's very important. Because in California, hospitals you can't be the patient of a hospital. You can only be the patient of a doctor who has an affiliation with the hospital. So if I go into the hospital, right, the hospital is going to say, first they're going to say, do your insurance. And the second thing they're going to say is, they're going to say, well, who's your family doctor? Because technically, that doctor, I'm that doctor's patient. So what could happen is that that doctor could say, well, yes, give my patient a bed in your hospital and I'll come by and give treatment because you're their patient. Now, family doctors don't really want to do that because they don't want to go back and forth in the hospital providing care for people. So what they do is they typically say, I will cede over to the hospital that you take care of my patient for me, but it's still my patient, because you're still the family doctor's patient. Does that make sense? So that's why it's when you go into a hospital, you're not really the hospital's patient. You're still your family doctor's patient, or whoever it is that you normally see. Now, sometimes it's more complicated, because sometimes people can have their primary doctor be a specialist. So, for example, a general internist is a specialist type of physician. The general internists kind of do what family doctors do, or a pediatrician. A pediatrician is a specialist, right? Like a lot of people with children, they're pediatricians who they take their children to. So pediatrician is actually the doctor of record for this patient, for this child, even though they're a specialist. But if that child then was to the hospital, then the pediatrician is the one who would be, that's their patient. Okay. It's also why, like a lot of times, if you go to the hospital and then you'll just be, like my mother-in-law went in there on Wednesday, right? By Saturday morning, she was ready to leave, and they were ready for her to leave. But they had to get the okay from the doctor to basically before she could leave. And the doctor was not the main doctor. The main doctor had ceded to another doctor, but that doctor wasn't there in the hospital, and so everyone was waiting around for this doctor to show up so that they could discharge the patient. So she got discharged on Sunday rather than Saturday, just because the doctor who was going to discharge her wasn't around. And that happens a lot when you go to the hospital. Is that you end up kind of in this situation whereby you're kind of at the mercy of whoever the doctor is that's going to be discharging you. Also, this last point there is that for you as a doctor to have to put a patient in there, you have to have admitting rights to that hospital. So, like in Merced, most doctors, I think all doctors, have admitting rights to Mercy Hospital. That means that Mercy Hospital said, yes, if you have a patient, we'll take your patient. But you might remember one of the ways that they were trying to, that some states were trying to limit abortion access, was that they were trying to say that doctors who perform abortions had to have admitting rights to the hospital. And so what that meant is that a hospital could sit there and say, well, no, we're not going to give you admitting rights if you do abortions. And there's nothing illegal about that. Hospitals could decide who they give admitting rights to. But what it would have done is effectively made it so that doctors couldn't perform abortions because they didn't have admitting rights. Now, there's lots of different types of healthcare providers who don't have admitting rights to hospitals. Because if you're not dealing with patients who are going to necessarily end up in the hospital on a regular basis, then you don't need admitting rights. And also, just because you see a doctor who doesn't have admitting rights doesn't mean that you can't go to the hospital. It just means that that doctor can't be the one who puts you in. As that if you go to the hospital, that doctor can't be your doctor forever. That's basically what it is. Then there's lots of different types of specialists. Cardiologists, neurologists, midwives, etc. Lots of different specialists that go along. So specialists then also didn't count technically as secondary care. But like I said, they can also be your primary care, because if primary care means who's the first point of contact. And so if you're someone who, if your child goes to a pediatrician, then pediatricians on the list there, they're technically a specialist, but they're your first point of contact. Okay, next, tertiary care. Tertiary care then means kind of that specialty type of care. So tertiary care facilities are things for which you provide high-end, kind of high-tech type of care. So for example, if you go over to Mercy Hospital, you'll see that Mercy Hospital has the UC Davis Cancer Center associated with it. So the UC Davis Cancer Center is run by UC Davis. So UC Davis has a hospital at the Sacramento, and they have a cancer center there. That's a tertiary center. And what they do is that they have an arm down here at Fresno in Merced, so that if you are somebody who has cancer and you go to Mercy Hospital can say, oh, why don't you go to the UC Davis Cancer Center? And so you just walk, across the little walkway over to the cancer center. When you get there, though, you stop being Mercy's patient, and in fact, you stop being your primary care doctor's patient. You're now the tertiary center's patient. So it means that tertiary centers differ from hospitals because tertiary centers, you become their patient. So if you go to a cancer center, you are the patient of the cancer center, which means that your primary care doctor doesn't have to sign off on what happens. So if you go to Mercy Hospital, right, secondary care hospital, and they want to amputate your leg, what they have to do is they have to call your primary care doctor. They have to say, hey, we need to amputate this person's leg. And the primary care doctor then, in theory, can sit there and say, no, I don't give you approval to do that. Because you're the primary care doctor's patient. You could turn around and say, screw this primary care doctor. I want this. I'm not going to use this doctor anymore. But technically, that doctor has to give permission for this. Tertiary hospitals aren't that way. When you go to a tertiary hospital, the tertiary hospital can control your what you get. So it means that tertiary hospital doesn't have to turn around. The cancer center doesn't have to go back to the primary care doctor and say, hey, we're going to give radiation treatment. Instead, they make all the decisions. So that's why tertiary centers are specific, and then you become their patient. So here's a list of certain type of tertiary centers. So cardiac surgery, stroke units are usually tertiary centers. Burn centers are tertiary centers. And so when you enter one of those, you become their patient. Now, you can be in a cancer center and still go to your primary care doctor for other things, right? It's not like all your care has to be in the tertiary center. But if you're in a tertiary center, then they're going to control the care that they give for whenever that specialty is. Tertiary centers also, if you think about kind of how many different providers there are lots of family doctors and GPs, and then there are a smaller number, but still a lot, of specialists, and then there's a fewer number of hospitals, and then there's only a very specific number of tertiary centers. So, not every place should have a tertiary center. Like, should Mercy Hospital open up a tertiary center? Not really. Mercy Hospital Davis can have a tertiary center. But when you enter the UC Davis's tertiary center, you're going to be treated primarily by a doctor who's employed by UC Davis's health system. And so they tend to be, the rule of thumb for tertiary centers is that if you're doing something like heart surgery, you want to go to someplace where they do a lot of them. You don't want to go someplace where they only do a few of them, which is why tertiary centers tend to be not very many of them, and they tend to kind of draw in big areas. Like Children's Hospital. Children's Hospital is a specialty hospital, right? That basically serves the most of the valley, and it's provides really good care for children. And the reason that they form children's hospitals is so that they can basically get that enough people in there, enough patients in there, so that they can have people who are specialists in treating children. Okay, what determines access to secondary or tertiary? Well, secondary, that's you can't get, so you can go to Mercy Hospital. Mercy will admit you, but you're still the patient of your doctor. Tertiary, you're handed over to the tertiary center. So the tertiary center becomes your doctor. You're the one who determines your type of care you need. Okay, so you understand? For primary, secondary, tertiary, the main thing about primary care is that it can be anyone, right? It's essentially who you go to. So if you go on the line and ask some ChatGPT bot about your treatments, is that they become your primary care treater. If you go to a pharmacist, they become your primary care. It's whoever you go to first that becomes your Like a EMT's like, no, what's an EMT? I see. I guess an EMT would be, I mean, so there's lots of different types of providers who are not going to be either a primary or a secondary kind of provider. So like EMTs, they are going to be your first point of contact if you have a certain type of condition, right? Like you have a broken leg. But they're not, if you think about what it should be for a primary care provider, it's this thing, is the long-term stable relationship. So the idea is that whoever your primary care provider is someone who knows you, or at least that you have some type of relationship with. So that's why traditional medicine, traditional healers can be primary care providers. EMTs, unless you're calling me, if you're going to call the EMT when you have an ear infection, then I guess your EMT could be your primary care provider. But primarily, the EMT is just an extension of the secondary care providers. Other questions? The other thing to note is that in California, and we'll talk about this in a second, California hospitals the hospital can't hire doctors to be your primary care doctor. The hospital can have hospital doctors who work in the hospital, and that when they come in, if your primary care doctor says that they give you permission for the hospital doctor to treat you, then they basically treat you. But it's not what the hospital can form its own medical group. And this becomes an issue because if you notice, like here, there's the Mercy, the Merced medical group. There's like one group of doctors, but there's another group of doctors that Dignity Health is sure tried to form as well. But there's a separation that even though Dignity is sort of supporting this group forming, they don't actually work for Dignity Health. So that Dignity can't employ those doctors. In other states, they can. In other states, hospitals could go out there and hire primary care doctors. Because if you think about it, one of the big problems that they have is they have people who inappropriately use the emergency rooms. So that rather than having it for things that could be treated by primary care, they end up in an emergency room. So one of the obvious solutions is to say, well, why not just have a primary care, when people come in to the emergency room, you have two doors. One door leads to the emergency department, the other door leads to a primary care center. And then just say to people, well, why don't you go to the primary care center, because you don't really need emergency care. And then that way they can get signed up and things like that. So it makes a lot of sense. In a lot of other countries, that's the way that they work. They do have kind of an arm that can go to the primary care, but California doesn't do that. And so what will happen is that somebody will come into the emergency department of Mercy, and what Mercy does is that they don't want to come in, right? They want to get into primary care. So they'll call Golden Valley, or they'll have the patient call Golden Valley, and try to get them into Golden Valley, because Golden Valley is the primary care thing that should pay people who don't have private insurance. Other questions? Okay. Provider organizations then. So you'll often hear them talk about ambulatory facilities. Ambulatory basically means things you can walk up to. So your family doctor is an ambulatory clinic because you can walk to it. Pharmacies are ambulatory clinics, etc. Most of these things are for-profit. Some are not for-profit, like you can have a not-for-profit primary care facility. But for the most part, most of them are for-profit. The other type of things are sort of hospitals or non-ambulatory facilities. So hospitals then, are things that typically can be not-for-profit or they can be for-profit. As we'll discuss later on if we have time, we'll go into it, but there's not really much difference between a not-for-profit hospital and a for-profit hospital. As that not-for-profit doesn't mean that they don't make profits. It just means that they don't have shareholders that they give profits to. But if you're a not-for-profit hospital and you get money, right, you get extra money, what do you do with it? You pay for your doctor. You have nice offices. You have flash facilities. So not-for-profit doesn't mean that they don't make profits. It just means that they don't have shareholders. And so that's why when they look at, when they've done studies to look at, well, are there differences between not-for-profit hospitals and for-profit? They say, no. I mean, ironically, a lot of for-profit hospitals end up being in low-income areas, not-for-profit hospitals in high-income areas. And partly because not-for-profit hospitals mean that doctors get paid more. And so therefore, okay, the other thing to remember about this, there's also teaching hospitals. So teaching hospitals then are a separate thing. Like if you go down to Fresno, there's UCSF Fresno Medical School down there. Anyone been down to seen UCSF Fresno's medical school down there down in Fresno? So it's right by community hospital. So community hospital is a giant hospital. So community hospital, big hospital, and right next door is UCSF Medical Center. Well, the UCSF Fresno Medical Center is not a hospital. It's just where the UCSF faculty kind of have their offices, but they do all their clinical work over in the community medical center. So that there's a deal between community medical center and UCSF Fresno that says, oh, we'll do our clinical work over here, and we'll also teach students as well. And so the hospital, the community medical center, then agrees to allow interns and other students that come in and be part of their system. But they're technically separate. On the other hand, if you go to San Francisco to see UCSF, UCSF has a huge hospital. If you go to why was that North Carolina before this? You go to North Carolina, UNC has a gigantic UNC hospital. It's a hospital. It operates just like every other hospital, except they have some faculty members who also teach the medical students. And then they have more medical students around. But that's really the only difference. Other than that, they operate pretty much the same. And then the other thing is just EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act that I mentioned. And EMTALA is really important because EMTALA means that hospitals have to treat you, they can't turn you away. Like I said, they can charge you, they don't have to treat you for free, but they can't turn you away. And that was a really big deal because before EMTALA, if you were having a heart attack and you go over to Mercy and you didn't have insurance, Mercy could say, ooh, we don't take people without insurance. Go to down in Fresno. And so people were dying from being shuttled from hospital to hospital because the hospital didn't have this treatment. And EMTALA came along and said that this was it. Congress came along and said, no. From now on, anyone who comes in the hospital, you have to treat them. So that was a big deal. And it turns out that that's a big deal for when the Affordable Care Act was being put together, was the fact that EMTALA existed meant that was one of the rationales for why the Affordable Care Act could come through and do things like require you to get health insurance. Okay, how are physicians organized? Now this gets really complicated, and so I'm going to give you some basic ones here, but there's lots of different types of models for this. So the most basic model that we think about for how healthcare providers are organized is the solo practice. So this is the doctor has a practice, and then she has her office over there, and she sees patients and such. So this is what we typically think of as like how most doctors as small business people would operate. You actually don't see very many of those. The only ones that you actually see are kind of rural areas. And why do you think it is that more doctors don't just go for a solo practice? Well, yeah. Oh, they could get paid less, but you might think, oh, they get paid more, right? Because they can just charge what they want. They don't have to answer to anyone. They're their own, so it could be. Yeah. Well, so if you think about if you're a doctor, what do you need to be a doctor? You need to go get a building, right? You have some rooms, you need to have a nurse, you need to have a receptionist. So are you going to be able to be busy enough to keep both those people employed? Well, usually you think of it like there's basically one nurse and one receptionist can basically be 4 different doctors, right? Because you don't need every doctor doesn't need receptionists. So there's one reason to get together, which is just that, you kind of go through that, the things that you need that make sense to share. That's one reason. The more important reason is that, well, what if one of these doctors wants to take a vacation? Who takes their patients, right? Well, if you're in a practice that's a group practice, then you can go on vacation with one of these 3 doctors and take it. But if you're in a solo practice and you want to get on vacation, who takes your patients? Well, they have these things called locums. A locum is a doctor, that are kind of doctors who will come and fill in for doctors when they go on vacation. So it happens with group practices too. If you have a small practice and one person wants to go to Europe for a month, is that they'll get a locum that comes in. And locums usually are just temporary contracts. They're they're paid just to come in and just to kind of fill in for a short period of time, and then they go out again. Like I had a neighbor of mine, she was a doctor. This was when I was living in New Zealand. And she was a doctor, and she had a practice and everything else. And then one day, I noticed that she was no longer having the practice. So I asked her why not. And she said that, well, she was basically just a locum. She'd go to Australia. Because, Australia has a lot of rural areas with a single doctor, so they need locums. So they were paying her as much a month as she paid in 6 months to be a locum, because they really needed someone to go in those rural areas. And so, she would go be a doctor in a rural area for a couple months, and then come back and go be a doctor in a rural area someplace else for a couple months. So, if you like to travel and see different things, it's a good way to travel. And so there are doctors that do that. But it's a real problem if you're in a rural area. Also, if you're in a rural area, and it means that you're the one 24/7 who's going to be on call. So doctors get burned out in rural areas. All right, next type is what's called group practice. So the group practice can be one of 2 ways. It can either be where you get like 4 GPs all band together, share a receptionist, share a nurse, share data, equipment, things like that. Right? So you get 4 doctors to do that. That's a single specialty group practice. Or you can get a group practice where you have a doctor, a primary care doctor, a couple primary care doctors, and you may have a specialist who's a gerontologist, and you have another specialist who's a pediatrician, and they group together. So why would you want to, if you're a GP, why would you want to form that type of specialty where you band together with the pediatrician and the gerontologist, let's say? Well, let's say if you go into your family doctor and that they say, oh, you need to go and see a podiatrist. You have to go see a specialist, a podiatrist. So how do you find a podiatrist? And well, I guess you could just sort of go and look in the phone book and find a podiatrist and call up and say, well, will you see me? And that they may say, well, we can see you in 6 weeks. You'll be able to see it. We'll have an appointment then. So then you're kind of stuck. So what you'd like to do is you'd have a general practitioner to be able to sort of get you into the podiatrist much more quickly. So if the podiatrist, like if you're a GP and that you have a lot of children in your practice, or you're a GP and you want to sort of tell the parents, oh, we've got a podiatrist in our practice, then it means that when you have someone come in, is that you can go through that. The podiatrist is in your group, so you can get them quicker access to the specialist. So that's the reason why they do these multi-specialty type groups, is to go through to basically get people so that they have better access to these specialties along the way. And because the assumption being is that a specialist who's in the group is going to give preference to the other doctors in the group than they will to an outside doctor. So the most extreme example of this is Kaiser. Anyone here in Kaiser? Yeah. So if you're in Kaiser, then you go to a Kaiser doctor, right? And if you see a specialist, then you go to a Kaiser specialist. That is, that Kaiser has their own specialists. Can a Kaiser specialist see non-Kaiser patients? No. Kaiser specialists can only see Kaiser patients. That means that you're guaranteed that if you go to a Kaiser GP, is that you're going to have access to your Kaiser specialist. Whereas if I'm an independent specialist here, and I have this relationship with these two doctors, I'm going to give their patients first priority. And anyone else who calls in, if I have spots, I'll open up, and I'll give it to them. But if not, I have no I'm under no obligation to go through and move these people to the top of the queue. That's a multi-specialist. What's the downside of a multi-specialist? Why don't all doctors just have multi-specialist arrangements? Well, you need to have a lot of patients in a group to basically keep an ear, nose, and throat person fully committed. And so it just becomes very complicated to do it. And so that's why a lot of doctors just don't do it. Or what they'll do is that they'll join a network where there are a bigger network of doctors where there are specialists like that. So if they can go through that, they can get access to that. Hospital-owned practices, this is what I was mentioning, not legal in California, but other states that they can go through and that the hospital can actually employ all these people, but not in California. And then there's the health maintenance organization. So health maintenance organization, that's HMO. That's where you have essentially an insurance company, those are insurance companies, who then go through and that they either hire the doctors or they have special arrangements with the doctors, so that when you become when you go through and you join in their insurance company, you get access to their doctor groups. So anyone here have Anthem Blue Cross? Yeah. So if you have Anthem Blue Cross, that's what I have. So if you have Anthem Blue Cross, is that when you join Anthem, they'll give you a list of doctors, and they'll say, well, these are the doctors that we have negotiated deals with, so that they'll take you as a patient. They don't have to take you as a patient. So that if I call up and I say I'm an Anthem Blue Cross, then they may say, well, we're all full up, so they don't have to take you. But it means that if I try to call another doctor that's not an Anthem Blue Cross doctor, Anthem will say, no, we're not going to pay for them. So HMOs then have a group of doctors, have a group of specialists, have a group of hospitals that they may they negotiate with, have deals with, and also labs and everything else. And so when you join an HMO, you join that insurance company, and you get whatever access you can to the doctors in that. Now, characteristics of these things is that they're usually done by a geographic area, and the reason they did that is because they need to make deals with the doctors in that area, they need to make deals with the hospitals in that area, so they need to do it sort of geographically where you are. So it tends to be a defined geographic area. Or if you think of like Kaiser, Kaiser's not in Merced. Why isn't Kaiser in Merced? Because there's no Kaiser hospital. And so therefore, you can't be a Kaiser patient and then here. You can be a Kaiser patient in Fresno, because there's a Kaiser hospital in Fresno. I think there's a Kaiser hospital in Modesto. I think there's one in Modesto. So you can be a Kaiser patient in Modesto, but not in Merced, because there's no hospital. So they do it by regions. The HMO has some type of deal. They make sort of prearranged deals with all the providers about how much they're going to pay for things, so that there's not a lot of argument that goes on between the providers and the HMO about what they're going to pay for. And then they get a group of people who are going to enroll. So when I enroll in Anthem Blue Cross, I am part of an HMO, because Anthem Blue Cross then has these deals like that. So there's different types. So the group model is one for which the HMO contracts with a group of physicians, and that the physicians then they set a fee per patient, and so the HMO pays those groups of those physicians for the patients, but the group of patients is not, the doctors are not not employed by the HMO. So this is Medi-Cal works this way. Medi-Cal, in in Merced, the Medi-Cal purchaser is the Alliance for Health, which is a organization that they just get money from the Department of Healthcare Services, and that then they purchase everything for people with Medi-Cal. And so what they do is they would go to Golden Valley, and they'd say, Golden Valley, okay, Golden Valley, if you take one of our patients, we'll pay you a certain amount. And so Golden Valley and the Alliance then negotiate how much they're going to pay per patient to go see Golden Valley. And they would, and then for Mercy Hospital, if the patient goes to Mercy Hospital, they would negotiate how much they're going to pay for all the different procedures at Mercy Hospital. So they make that kind of arrangement. But neither Mercy nor Golden Valley work for the Alliance, they're independent. So that's a group model. Independent practice association is kind of similar to that. So it starts to get in all these different types of models. They start getting just the minutia about who's working for who and how independent they are. So sometimes you can find when children were young, we were living in Philadelphia, and we had insurance through my wife's work. She was working at St. Joseph's University. We had insurance through there. And we chose the cheapest insurance possible. And so what they did is they said, okay, here's this group of doctors that you can see. So we went and picked a doctor. We were seeing him for a couple of years. Loved the doctor, that was great. And then one day we get a letter that says, oh, no longer can you see that doctor. That whole doctor group, we're going to just cut out. We're not going to use it much. You have to find a new doctor. And I was upset. I said, well, why? And they said, well, because what this doctor group was doing is that they were contracting with our insurance company, but they're also contracting with another insurance company. And so they were basic applications for both of those. So they were independent practice. And what this other insurance company did is they came through and they said to this group, look at it, from now on, when you take a new patient, just take our patients. And now, so don't get rid of all your other patients, but as they drift off, then just only take our patients. So they were moving from a model whereby this practice took patients from both groups into one where they only took from the other. Why would this practice do that? Because this insurance company paid them $50,000 each in cash to do this. And so what our insurance company did then is our insurance company said, well, screw this. We're going to pull all of our patients right now. So they lost 40%, 50% of their business overnight because our insurance company said, no longer are we going to go ahead and let our patients go there. I was upset. Did I have a right to be upset? Did I have a right to be upset? Lost my doctor. Lost the doctor I liked. We got another doctor. It's horrible. Horrible doctor. Here's a nice guy in some level, but not a very good doctor. So I wasn't very happy that we switched and had to go to a bad doctor. But whose fault was it? It was my fault. I chose the cheapest insurance plan. The cheapest insurance plan was the one that basically had this type of arrangement, and I was this insurance company's, I was their patient, right? I wasn't this doctor's patient. This doctor, I could have said, well, screw your insurance company. I'm still going to go see this doctor. And this doctor would have said, great, you just paid everything I was talking about. So as long as I wanted this insurance company to pay for it, the insurance company could come through and make deals all day long. So that's why the HMO, there's all these different models because they have all this different type of relationship between the different type of providers. Same thing for hospitals. If you're in a big city and there's different hospitals, is that your insurance company may say, well, you can go to this hospital and not that one. So, like with Kaiser, if you're Kaiser, if you break your leg, you go to Mercy Hospital, Kaiser will say, fine, we'll pay for you because you're in Merced, there's no Kaiser Hospital, so we'll pay for you. But if you have to come back and have surgery, you're not going to get surgery. They're not going to pay for you to have surgery at Mercy Hospital. They're going to tell you to come back to the Kaiser Hospital. In fact, this same insurance company is that I was on a trip and I broke my foot playing basketball with my nephews, and I was dumping on them, and they got mad at me. They realized the only way to stop me was to break my foot. So they broke my foot. So I went to a hospital over here in Manly, and they treated it, and then they said, well, look, you're probably going to get a pin put in it. And so I called my insurance company back in Philadelphia, and I said, I just broke my foot, and you get a pin put in it. And they said, great, sounds like good idea. I said, well, great, so I can just schedule it for this hospital. And they said, no, you have to come back to Philadelphia. So even though I was not in Philadelphia, is that once I moved past the acute phase and the other treatment I had to go back to the hospital. Why didn't they want to pay for me just to do it at Maryland Hospital? Why did they want me to come back to the Philadelphia hospital? Say what? Well, not that, but they had a deal with the Philadelphia hospital about how much they would pay for these things. If I went to Mammoth could give them a bill and said that cost us $100,000. And so, the insurance company could say, forget it, we're not going to pay it. But then they're in a fight with Mammoth Hospital over how much they're going to pay for things. And they don't want to do that. They want to go to the hospital that's in their region. If they have a deal with it, the hospital knows if you have someone who comes in with a broken foot, this is how much money you get. So that's why they try to do everything within kind of their networks, is because they have deals, they have deals about all this stuff. They also, like HMOs, one thing that they'll do is that they'll say, before you do a procedure, you have to get approval from the HMO. So like if I go to my doctor and the doctor wants to pin my foot because I broke my foot, they have to call the HMO. The HMO may say, no, we're not going to approve that. Turns out that doctors really don't like it when they make some diagnosis like this. And then the HMO turns around and says, tough, we're not going to do it. We think that just some other type of thing is warranted. Because now the HMO is not just paying for things, it's also deciding on your care as well. Do they have a right to do that? Yeah, they're paying for it. I mean, you have a right to sit there and say to the HMO, well, forget it. I'm going to get it anyways. And the doctor would say, I'm all for it too. But then the insurance company is going to say, well, great, we pay for it because we're not going to pay for it. All right, network model, etc. So then the other sort of main kind of model that comes out of this is the staff model. So this is Kaiser Permanente. So Kaiser Permanente is really two different organizations. Right? You've got the Kaiser hospitals and the Kaiser insurance company. And the Kaiser insurance company, then they own a bunch of hospitals. And then you have the Kaiser Permanente doctor group. And so that's what all the doctors and nurses work for, is the Kaiser Permanente. And what happens is that the Kaiser hospital, insurance company, has a deal with Kaiser Permanente doctors, where they say to the Kaiser doctors, we're going to put you on salary so that all the doctors know what they're going to make. And you can only treat our patients. And in return, the Kaiser company says to the Kaiser doctors, and we're going to give you this salary no matter how many patients you see. So it's a very different model. But what Kaiser does then is that they have specialists, they have hospitals, they have everything within the network. So when you are a Kaiser patient, you get everything within your Kaiser network of doctors and Kaiser hospitals and Kaiser labs and Kaiser everything else. The last one is preferred provider organizations. Probably most of what you're not Kaiser and you have some type of health insurance, health insurance through HMO, you probably have this preferred provider organization. And that's when I was talking about where the HMO is some type of deal with all these different types of providers. Okay, so in Merced Hospital, Mercy Hospital, it's also like UC Merced will never really have a medical school, because if UC Merced wants to have a medical school, they need to have a hospital, and that to have a hospital, you have to have big beds, because the hospital has to be big enough to have all the different specialties, so that the students can get trained. And so, they're never going to, Merced's just not big enough to have a 300-bed hospital sitting on here in San Diego. So that's why any type of medical school that UC Merced has, ultimately is going to be in Fresno. So if you look at the program we're putting together now, it's basically UCSF's medical program that UC Merced students can kind of access, but still UCSF's program. And it's because it's really expensive to have a hospital, and you need a lot of patients in there. You need a lot of patients from different types of, with all sorts of different types of specialties. Like even Fresno, UCSF Fresno struggles because one of the specialties that when students come out to UCSF Fresno, they would have to do children's care. And so what happens it used to be is that UCSF Fresno had a deal with a children's hospital. So when medical students would come out from UCSF and do a rotation in Fresno, is that they would go to the community hospital and do different types of rounds for geriatrics and other things. But then for all the children's hospitals, the pediatrics, they go over to Children's Hospital. And then so Children's Hospital would also then have this help train the UCSF students. So it all went well until community hospital, well, first off, just hospital politics are nasty. They're nasty everywhere. And Fresno is particularly nasty. And so, St. Agnes doesn't really get some wars with community hospital. Community hospital gets some wars with children. So it's just that it's not a very collaborative environment. Anyways, Children's Hospital or community hospital is getting upset because they thought that Children's Hospital was not giving them priority to their patients. So when they had a patient come in, a child come in, and they needed to transfer them over to Children's Hospital, they felt that Children's Hospital was not being responsive enough in terms of letting them in. Was Children's Hospital? Who knows? Doing this? Who knows? But that's what they thought. And so community hospital said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to start our own children's ward. So they started building this children's ward in community hospital. Well, Children's Hospital didn't want that because they didn't want to have a competition of another community hospital building its own kind of children's hospital. And so they turned around and told UCSF Fresno, that's it, no longer are we going to allow your interns to come over here and get the pediatric care. And so instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make a deal with Stanford Hospital. And so Stanford Hospital started to send out some of the students out there. Anyways, why would Stanford want to do it? Why would Stanford want to make a deal with Children's Hospital here in Fresno? The patients. What does Stanford want? Well, because Stanford's got a gigantic hospital, right? Down there in Colorado. It's a very, very wealthy hospital. Well, what they really want is they want children to have rare conditions. Because if you're going to be having a children's hospital, you want to have as many kids of a certain type of condition coming through as possible. Because if you're going to spend all the money to set up all the facilities and all the equipment and everything else, then you need a lot of kids. So you need to draw from a lot of areas. So what they really wanted is that they wanted is sort of the hard cases from Fresno to be able to come to Stanford. And so one of the things they made a deal of is basically this helicopter service that would take kids back and forth between Fresno and Stanford Hospital. All right. Questions about that? So that's the basics on providers. Any questions or rehab anything? And I didn't talk about rehab hospitals and all these things like physiotherapists and speech therapists and everything. They all have having what's called auxiliary help. So sometimes you'll hear people say, I'm going to go to auxiliary help. And what that means is that those are kind of the other types of specialties or other types of things like physiotherapists that aren't specialties. So they don't have to be a medical doctor. But they provide health care of various types. Okay. So if you look worldwide, so next question is basically what type of healthcare system do we have in the US? So if you look worldwide, you'll see that there are 4 different types of systems. There's the national health services, like England, Australia, New Zealand. They all have a national health service. You have a government-funded health system, like Canada. You have an insurance-based system, like Germany. And then you have an out-of-pocket system, like India or Vietnam or places like that. Now, I'll preface this by saying is that there's, it's not quite a clear kind of distinction with this. I think I mentioned I go down to Colombia a lot, down in Bogota. So Bogota, Bogota has, they have private hospitals. And when I saw the care that you get in private hospitals in Bogota, if you've got money, it's pretty much the same as the private hospital in San Francisco or anyplace else. It's pretty much the same. So, in a place like Colombia, or any country like this that's somewhat developed, is you're going to get healthcare that's pretty good if you've got the money, if you've got good private insurance. On the other hand, if you don't have health insurance, and you don't have money in Colombia, then you're probably going to be on a pay-as-you-go system. Meaning is that if you need healthcare, you pay for it. If you don't have money, then you don't have health. So that's the way a lot of the work is that if it's a pay-as-you-go system, and so there's no kind of guarantee that you're going to get healthcare. Okay, so briefly I'll go through these. So in New Zealand, healthcare is hospital care is free. So if you go to the hospital, the government owns and operates the hospitals. So if you're down there in New Zealand, if you fall and break your leg, you go to the hospital. They don't ask you if you have insurance. There's no bills at the end of it. They just they'll look at your leg and treat it, and then if you need to be transferred to a hospital. Just so we're clear, the way that hospitals work is you alert to the department, and then if you need to stay in the hospital, they transfer you over to the hospital department. Right? So down there is that you break your leg, see the emergency department, it's all free. Go to the hospital's all free. There are private hospitals. The private hospitals tend to be sort of focused on things that are uncomplicated and knee replacements. Knee replacements, like if I was in New Zealand and I needed a knee replacement, I'd probably just spend $10,000 and go over and get it in a private hospital, then go to a public hospital, because the wait's shorter and things like that. But I could get everything from the public hospital if I need to. The doctors in the hospital are on salary, but they usually have some type of private practice on the side that they get extra money from. For family doctors, the way it works is that everyone signs up for a family doctor, and that then family doctors are independent, so they're not on salary from the government. But what they do is that they essentially get subsidies from the government, so they get paid for every patient that they see. And so then, at the same time, then they'll charge the patient as well. So I think, like if I go down to the doctor in New Zealand, I think it's about $35 that they'll charge me, and then they get an extra $50 from the government. Oh, and if you're low income, then you don't have to do the copayment. So the government will pay you the copayment if you're low income or if you're a high health user. So if you have to go to the doctor a lot, then you get a high health card. Medications, we'll talk about this more when we talk about medications and drugs. But the idea is that the government negotiates prices for availability for certain type of medications, and that all prescription fees is $15. So when you go in to get any type of prescription, $15 each time. That's for the subsidized medications. If it's not subsidized, as if the government have said that, well, we're not going to subsidize this one, and sometimes they let it in, they give the full price, or whatever the drug company charges you, but they also say that to certain drug companies that, well, we're not going to let you sell your drug there, and they do that to be able to try and negotiate prices, which we'll talk about. And then other services kind of depends upon what you need, but the government basically provides the other services as well. So that's a national health service. That's the same type of situation as in England, where hospitals are owned by the government, and GPs are private. At the same time, they get mostly paid for by the government. Anyone here in Canada? Anyone in the city? In Canada, but hospitals are run by private, not government run. So the government doesn't own the hospitals, but they basically pay for care in the hospitals, and all doctors are paid salary. Same thing for family doctors. Family doctors are private, but people have a health card, and that through that health card, then they get reimbursed. The doctor gets reimbursed for seeing patients. Medications, it varies. From what I can tell, it varies by province. So some provinces have special type of a program for medications. Other provinces don't. And then other services, basically, again, it varies across provinces in terms of how much they provide. But the basic idea is that the government doesn't run any of the hospitals. They don't hire the doctors. They don't hire the physical therapists. Instead, what they do is they pay for them, and they're all private. Germany. So everyone in Germany has to have health insurance. There are two types of plans. There's private plans, and then there's a public plan. So insurance companies can come to and they can offer a healthcare plan to people. And so people can get it through their employer or through however they're going to get it. Everyone's got to get insurance. And they can either get one of these government plans or they can get a private plan. But the private plans are pretty heavily regulated, are very heavily regulated. So there's not that much difference between the private plans and the public plans in terms of what they offer and their prices and things like that. But the key is everyone's have to have private health insurance. Hospitals privately run, family doctors are private, medication is paid by insurance, other things are paid by insurance. So the government essentially, they don't pay you directly. Instead, what they do is that you get funded through an insurance fund. Then healthcare in India or Colombia or other places where there's where less developed is that people with private insurance get good healthcare. People without insurance typically have to pay out of pocket, and that there's no obligation to provide you healthcare if you can't pay for it. A lot of places they will have their own version of an Impala, whereby if you go to a hospital, they'll treat you in some degree. But for the most part, it's not the same thing here, where they have to treat you at the same level as they treat patients with insurance. All right. So which of these four do you think we have here? How many say that we have our system is like the New Zealand system? How many say that our system is like the Canadian system? How many say our system is like the German system? How many say our system is like India? How many think it's all of these? And the answer is all of them. So what makes the U.S. so special is that we have all four systems in one. So if you are in a veteran, in a veterans hospital, or if you're in Indian affairs, if you're on a reservation, then you're kind of like, you have a healthcare system that's like New Zealand. If you are in Medicare or Medicaid, then you have a healthcare system that's like Canada. If you have private insurance, or if you have insurance through the Affordable Care Act, then you're like Germany. And if you're uninsured, then you're kind of like India, except we also have EMTALA. Right? EMTALA means that, unlike other countries, that if you're uninsured, you can still go to the hospital and give you some kind of care. All right, so why don't we stop there? Because next time I'll tell you all about each of these different types of programs. Any questions before we start? See you on Thursday.